Alright, so we're going to import the textures we just created. I'm going to hold down Control so I can multi-import. Click on Open. So here are our maps. I'm going to right click, go to Material, create a new material. I'm going to name this M_bricks. Now inside our material editor, I'm going to select our textures, move them inside. I'm just going to organize this a bit. Plug in our base color. Plug in our normals. In our RGB map, we're just going to plug it into the appropriate slots here. So we're not going to plug in the height just yet. We have to create a parallax node for that. So if we look at our texture, you can see that the light is actually inverted. So this is because our normals, our green channel is actually flipped. So sometimes ZBrush does this. So we can easily correct this. If we double click on our normal map, now what we want to do is we want to go to this option right under Advanced, under Texture. So if you click on this little knob here, you'll expand this, and you want to go to Flip Green Channel. And that will flip the green channel for you. Now there's one more thing we need to do. Under Compressed Settings, you want to make sure that this setting is always checked. Always make sure that this is set to Normal Map. And now under our texture, what we want to do is you want to change this to Normal Map. So there's our texture. It's looking pretty good now. Everything's loaded correctly. So here's our normal. Everything's done here. I'm just going to click on Save. Alright, so now we're going to create the parallax effect. So we need to type in Parallax Occlusion Mapping, and this is the node we'll be using. Now you can see it's really large. It's very complicated. Now the very first thing we need is our height map, so we need to select this. We're going to copy and paste it. Now we actually need to change this to a texture object. So if we go to Convert to Texture Object, we can now connect this right into the texture map input. So now we want to create some scalar parameters to go with this. So if you hold down S and left click on your background, you'll be able to create a scalar parameter. And I'm just going to name this parameter height ratio. Now I'm going to set the default value to 0.05. Alright, so we're going to create another parameter. So holding down S and left click on the background, naming the parameter min steps, default value set as to 1. Now another scalar parameter, I'm going to name this one max steps. I'm going to set the default value to 8, and I'm going to make sure to set a min and a max value. Now the reason why I'm going to set a min and max is because if you have a very large number, you can actually crash your system, because this is actually performance. The more steps, the more detail. Alright, so for our UVs, we need to create our texture coordinates. So if you hold down the U and left click on your background, you'll create the texture coordinate. And now I'll create another scalar parameter, and I'll name this UV underscore tiling. And I'll set the default to 1. Make sure to always set a default for this. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to multiply the 2. And then we can connect this into the UVs, just like that. Alright, so now for our height map channel, we need to tell which RGB channel is our height map stored in. So to create a 4 vector, we need to hold down the 4 key on our keyboard and left click on the background. Now, if I double click on this, I need to go to which channel it's set to and set it to 1. Press OK. You can see now that's turned to blue. And once I plug that in, it's going to say to use the blue channel, and that's where our height map is located. I'm going to name this reference plane. I'm going to set the default value to 1. Connect this. Alright, so this is pretty much set up. It's ready to go. What we need to do now is we need to go to Parallax UVs right here on the outputs and plug it into the inputs of all the UVs of our texture samples. Alright, so if we take a look at our material here, we can see the parallax effect is working now. Now I want to use those parameters. We have to create a material instance now so that we can play around with those parameters and change the depth. So if I select on our material, right click, go to create material instance. Now I'm just going to double click on it. Now you can see all our parameters are right on the top left. I'm just going to change this to a plane, rotate it so I can see its side. Alright, so now we can play around with the height. So you can see the gaps and how it breaks, and that's because there's not enough steps. So if I bring up the step count, you can see what happens. So obviously you don't want to make the heights too much, otherwise it kind of breaks the effect. We can even change the tiling. And you can see how that works. Just playing around with the tiling. The reference plane. Now the reference plane has to do with depth, so you don't want to play without too much. I usually leave it at 1. So now if I drag this onto our floor here, now you can see it's massive. So we can easily fix that. We can just go to our material instance and go to the tiling. Alright, so if we look at this closely, we can see it's a bit too reflective. It's a bit too shiny, my bricks. So what I'm going to do is we want to go to our texture here. We want to change the gamma of this texture. So if you disable the sRGB, what that does is that lightens the textures, so it's not as dark, and then your roughness appears correct. So right now mine's not loading, and this is pretty much because I need to change the texture mode now in my material. So if I double click on my material, look at my texture sample, I want to change the sampler type to linear color and hit apply. There we go. Now you can see our texture is looking a lot better. It's not looking shiny at all. Alright guys, so if you hold down L and left click on your background, you'll create a scene light on the place that you clicked on. So now I'm just looking at my brick texture under light. It's looking pretty good. Let's zoom in here. So you can see the parallax effect and how that's working. You can see it's actually causing depth. Now this effect works a lot better for floors and walls. So I'm just going to my material instance here. I'm going to maximize this window, and I'm going to go to my UV tiling and set it back to 1 so I can preview it here. Now if I hold down L and left click on my mesh, I can rotate the light, and I can preview the depth this way a lot better. So it's looking really nice, and we're pretty much done here, guys. So I really hope you enjoyed this tutorial. See you next time.